I remember being in Costa Rica, in the capital, San Jose, in a conscious community where there was this little oasis of people that were into yoga and meditation, and people would come from all around the world. And we each had our own separate rooms, and some shared a bathroom, some had their own suites with their private bathrooms, but we all shared the common spaces. And what I found is that I was coming out of my hermit journey when I first arrived there. And although it seemed like a good idea to book a stay at a conscious community, what I found is that it was actually really challenging for me, especially when I first got there, to connect with people, because it seemed as though the normal behavior paradigms of how we interact with each other in the 3D world carry over even in conscious communities. And so the small talk and getting to the process of getting to know people was very heavy for me. And especially because I felt as though every day was sort of like a waking meditation. And it really made me think about creating a place, a community for artists and creatives and those on the consciousness expansion journey where you could have no talking buffer zones. And you could practice interacting with people in a different way. Because what happens is that you start to evolve and you start to change. And the things that you want to talk about and prefer to talk about also usually change depending on your awakening journey. And for me, I was going from almost complete 3D materialism to a spiritual awakening and a consciousness expansion. And so my delta was very extreme. I didn't have a lot of friends that I could talk to about the things related to reality shifting or consciousness expansion or things of that nature. And so I was really excited to go to this conscious community. And what I learned is that just because people are on the consciousness expansion journey doesn't mean that their topics of consciousness and the things that they're working on overlap at that time. And what I found is that not everybody was interested in interacting in a new and different way. Some people were. And so I would be in the garden in this little oasis. The city was very chaotic, but being at this place was very magical because even though you could hear the city around you, like burr, burr, and you could smell like the smog depending on where you were at on the property. When you went to the garden, all you could hear were mostly the birds. And it was beautiful. And so there were swings out there, and I would sit on one of the wooden swings, and somebody would come up, and depending on who they were, I would ask them if we could sit in silence. And what I found myself doing is I found myself connecting with people in a new way, which actually deepened the energetic resonance and created some very magical moments. And to my surprise, some people also would ask me for silence, which I really appreciated. And none of us were bothered by it. And in fact, all of us understood at some level, even if we didn't always completely feel like we were on the same energetic wavelength, it was evident to me that, especially for like heavy meditators, people didn't want to just talk about the weather, right? But we didn't know how to interact differently. And sometimes I would be reality shifting literally, I would be like leaving my little suite and leaving my little bubble and coming out and trying to ground myself. And somebody would come up and I would be like, whoa, I cannot be normal right now. How on earth could I be normal right now? And it illustrated to me this principle of closing the gap, which is these behavior paradigms that we have. Well, and I should back up and say that some people respected the silence, but they didn't always understand it because they hadn't experienced that breakthrough to see how our behavior paradigms keep us locked into this dance of inauthenticity. You know, like we have these rote behavior patterns, like you go to the store and, can I get you anything else? Will this be it? You know, hi, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. You run into somebody. Oh, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. Yeah, what's new in your life? Oh, did you catch this? Did you catch that? Oh, did you hear about this? And it's very much of the mind. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's very enjoyable. I'm there now. I've come back down. And now I can interact with ease at different levels and it's not so painful. But before I sort of came back into this integrated 3D existence, it was very hard for me because I was so in meditation, just like other people. Like some people would come to the community and not leave their room because they couldn't socialize. And I remember meeting some cosmic friends where they were playing music and on the back patio. And I went out there and I said, I really want to join you, but I don't know if I can talk and be normal. And they said, you don't have to. Just come and be present. That's all you have to do. And so I didn't have to talk. I didn't have to pretend. And I could close my eyes and I could rock with the music in meditation. And I joined them in singing and we had a really beautiful experience. We're still friends in the ether. We don't talk regularly, as is common with my cosmic friends. We have an energetic connection beyond the 3D. I haven't checked on them in a while. I should. Anyway, so the point is like you get different flavors of people that come through the community. And I was happy that a lot of people knew and would reply in kind. But I was also disappointed to see that the way that the structure of our society is set up, our normal society, is that we have banality and mundane filler conversations as a way to connect. And this is the default setting for our society. And it is really annoying at some point when you start to awaken. You know, you're like, really? And then you see the value in it, you understand it. And now I don't mind it, right? I just met with a new friend today and had tea and talked very much from the mind, and it was totally fine. And I infused the mysticism there, and it was a great experience. But at certain points of your awakening journey, you might feel the same way if you haven't already experienced this, that you are yearning to connect with greater levels of authenticity and silence. Because the expansion that you are undergoing is so much more than just the mind and the everyday ordinary existence. It is, as Eckhart Tolle presents, it is the power of presence. And the power of presence is very, very tangible when you are energetically awake and aligned with another being. And it creates friction because you will be sitting there feeling that other person way beyond the conversation. And it's like the conversation is this pittance, is what I want to say, is like this piddly echo chamber of the way we are trained to be. It's like the things that are coming out of our mouth sometimes is literally just filler. It's just filler content. And at some point on the journey, you feel the consciousness of another person. I'm thinking of somebody in particular, a friend of mine, where it was like we would talk to each other, but it would feel different than what we were communicating with our words. And for me, it created a sense of frustration because I was like, what's coming out is not what I'm feeling and is not what I'm sensing. But yet this is just how we're supposed to be. And so it really illustrated in a variety of different ways this idea of closing the gap, because it created this understanding that I was surrounded by conscious people, but the way we were interacting with each other in the mundane did not always reveal everybody's consciousness, leading me to believe that we need places and events where we can bypass some of these fractured, inauthentic moments. You know, like when you meet somebody, especially in the United States, it's not as common when you start traveling the world, but when you meet somebody in the United States, one of the first 3 questions is, oh, so what do you do? And then you have a little elevator speech about your job or your business or, you know, the school that you're going to. And, oh, do you like it? How's it working out for you? You know, it's like every new encounter has this social map that we learn that becomes outdated when we start to awaken. And it creates this disconnect. And reality is what I believe, because the way we are showing up to our reality is this entrained person, this person that was learning social skills. Our social skills are taught to us at a very young age by our parents, by our school, and we learn this formula, and then it is reinforced in society. And it is done so in a materialistic binary society, which really starts to become its own sort of trap and frustrating experience when you are awake. It really is frustrating. I remember being with a very powerful soul connection, and it went both ways. It actually went both ways, where the last time we saw each other, we were driving in a car, they were driving, and we were going out to breakfast. And we both energetically were very, very active. And it was very intense. It was more than I was used to and more than they were used to. So it was kind of an overloading experience for both of us. But we were talking to each other in the mundane, and he was, you know, pointing out this beautiful part of the city and saying, oh, this is da 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 da. And I just stopped replying to him because I found it to be so abrasive. Like the curated personality was so abrasive to the like milky energy and the flowing, floaty energy of who I knew he really was and who I was experiencing at this deeper level. You know, I'm thinking of like the ocean, where we were interacting with each other as though we were laying on floats and sort of letting the waves push us. But the energy between us was like we were deep diving under the water at a depth that most humans wouldn't feel. And the pressure of being really, really deep underwater is extreme, right? And it takes some getting used to, and it's uncomfortable when you're scuba diving as you're getting used to it. I've only been once, so I'm not an expert, but you feel it and you have to acclimate to it. And so it was as though our conversation skills were at the top of the water, but the experience was so much deeper than that. And I couldn't even reply to him because I couldn't engage in that way. And so I just sat there and let him talk. And then we get to breakfast and I start talking about something banal, something mundane after we order. And he does the same thing to me. And intuitively, I know it's because the way I'm talking to him is so abrasive, because it's the way I'm talking to a normal person. And it defies the actual experience of what is going on between us energetically at a conscious level and at a spiritual awakening level. And so it creates this puzzle that I haven't yet solved, except asking people to be quiet sometimes and to not engage at the surface, especially when I can feel that my brain waves are more conducive for meditation or for quantum shifting. Like there is almost a hypnotic state that your brain waves will go into, and you'll be awake and trying to operate heavy machinery, and you'll be feeling like, wow, I just need to go lay down, because there is a rhythm to the brainwave activity when you go into some of these states that even when you're awake, you're not in the beta wave state. You're in a different state entirely. And especially when you're doing some heavy, heavy reality shifting, it's almost like, I imagine it's like HemiSync, if you're familiar with the 3-letter agency that put out something with the Monroe Institute. I believe it's very similar because it's so rhythmic. It's like vroom, vroom, vroom. But then you go out to the store and they're like, hey, how are you doing? And you're like, oh, I'm doing fine. And it disrupts everything. It disrupts the entire process. And so I believe that closing the gap is about creating new structures in our society for which we can be graceful socially and be socially acceptable. I remember going to a DJ event in LA, and it was like this premier I went with a friend. I didn't know them, but I wouldn't have known them. And so we went there, and I was out on the patio smoking, and all I could do was just sit in the chair. This is after dancing for a bit, and sit in the chair with my eyes closed because I was full in a mystic experience. Meanwhile, there are people that are chatting and talking, and all I could do was just be mystical at that time. I was in full channeling mode. There was a couple that came up to me and they asked me, are you a creative? They were also creatives. And I was like, yes. And so we got into a conversation. And I, at one point, went back into the eyes closed mystic experience and channeled a message to the woman who was a professor at a university nearby. And I put my hand over her heart chakra and delivered this message to her. And it was a profound moment. It was a very beautiful experience, but it was LA, so you can do things like that. And, like people are different in LA, especially in certain parts. But other parts of the world, it's weird. You can't do stuff like that. And so this is what I mean about we need to rethink some of our social structures, some of our social skills, some of our parties, some of our gatherings, to close the gap, to really help us reality shift collectively. Because what happens is that everybody's living in their own little bubble, their own little world, and then they go out to the store, they go out to the post office, and they're being normal. And then we can't find each other because everybody's being normal. And we're talking about all of the normal things and infusing, little hints here and there. But I actually think that we need a stronger push to help to reconfigure our society, to break away from some of the collectives that we don't belong in anymore. And especially talking about shifting to a new earth, like how are we going to shift there if we're all just going out and being the same, right? How does it happen realistically? And people are like, oh, well, the new earth is fantasy, or it's just this pretend place, or it's actually a thing that we shift into. How do we shift into it if we go out collectively to dinner parties, to the library, to the grocery store, and we're like, hey, Bob, how's it going? Yeah, yep. Oh, yeah. Oh, nice to see you too. Oh, how are the kids doing? Oh, I see. You see what I mean? What if Bob's a reality shifter too? How would you know? How would Bob know that you're a reality shifter? And so closing the gap is about catalyzing the new in strategic ways as a reality shifter, as a manifestor, as a creator, in a way that's comfortable for you, but surrounded by others and community of those who are like-minded. And when you are in a place where your brainwave activity is too rhythmic, like the hemisync phenomenon, vroom, 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 then it needs to be okay that you can just show up in silence and sit off in a corner, and we don't have to call you autistic and that you're stimming. Maybe you're awake. I'm not trying to say that there aren't those that are autistic and stimming, but you know what I mean. Maybe there's nothing wrong with some people. Maybe they need a moment because they're on overload, sensory overload, because something is going on with their brainwave activity and they're shifting realities. We need to have a way where we can collectively shift with each other, is my point, to really close the gap.